Of course, some poets just like to have fun, as Margaret Atwood does here, talking about a relationship. And of course, it's a comparison too, um, but it's also what you might call a pun. And the pun relies on the fact that so many words in English have more than one meaning. She says, "You fit into me like a hook into an eye, a fish hook, an open eye." It's a joke about the nature of hooks and eyes. Hooks and eyes are a way of attaching clothing. And normally you'd think, oh, they fit together like a hook and an eye. But in this case, they don't fit at all. It's a fish hook in an open eye. A really powerful, gross image there of a relationship gone very, very wrong. You expect one thing, then she delivers something else. It's quite a punch. Very funny. Very much a pun. In this opinion piece for the San Francisco Chronicle, December 12th of 2000, their columnist and reporter Joan Ryan takes a stand on whether the San Francisco Ballet School did or did not discriminate against 8-year-old Frederica Kiefer. They declined to admit her to their school on the grounds that she had the wrong body type to be a successful ballerina. Kiefer's mother sued. They sued the ballet school for discrimination, claimed that the rejection had caused her daughter confusion, humiliation, and then the author, Joan Ryan, examines the question of setting admission standards, and also the problems some parents create by pushing their kids to meet these high standards. What we want to do is to critique this article. Now, I think that's a pretty accurate summary of the article, and every good critique starts with a summary. Of course, the first question you want to answer is, to what extent does the author, Joan Ryan, in this case, succeed in her purpose? So you have to ask yourself, what is her purpose? And her purpose is to persuade. It's not primarily to entertain, although it is interesting. And it's not primarily to inform you about the ballet school's particular standards. It's more about persuading you that they have a right to have those standards and that it's not discrimination. So if it's a persuasive purpose, then we have to critique it based upon that. And one of the first things we look for in critiquing a persuasive piece is to look at whether the terms that are necessary to be defined are clearly defined. For example, if somebody writes the term family values in an article, a persuasive article, of course you'd want to know what they meant by family values. You'd be absolutely critical to know that. And if they never explained what it meant, if they just assumed that you knew, that would be a valid criticism. In the article itself, Ryan uses several terms. The most important one is body type, and that's what the San Francisco Ballet School uses as their application standard. What is a body type? In the 5th paragraph of this article, Ryan talks about body type as ethereal, elongated body that can float on air. She also talks about American ideals and whatever that means. She doesn't really define them, other than saying vaguely that all men and women are created equal. Well, she says they're not, but she doesn't really define what those ideals are. Maybe she doesn't define that clearly enough. I mean, those ideals might include fair play, equality of access, maybe the belief that decisions ought to be made based upon talent and not appearance. We don't know for sure. And I think that's a valid criticism of the piece, is that she doesn't define that carefully enough for us. And this is the kind of thing that you need to look for when you are critiquing an article. Next, you might want to ask, is the information that's in here used fairly? So that's the second thing you want to do. Is there fair use of the information? Is it accurate and up to date? And probably just as importantly, is it representative? Well, this article is not an information-heavy article. It depends more upon logic and not facts and figures. So I think we can say pretty fairly that Ryan has established that it's an 8-year-old girl, and she's been denied admission to a ballet school, and the mother is sued the school. That's pretty much legit. The third thing you might want to look for is whether it is, whether the piece is logical. Has it avoided logical fallacies or not? Under logical argumentation, one might look at whether there are emotionally loaded terms that are used by the author. Now, it's okay to make emotional appeals, but in most academic writing, for example, logical argumentation is probably more important than emotional argumentation. And sometimes emotionally loaded terms are used to be deceptive and to hide the facts, to rile us up so that we won't pay close attention to some of the logical tricks that are being used. Now, Ryan says several things that border on being emotionally loaded. She talks about disturbing issues in the story. Is about weight. And she talks about no safety net. And she talks about watching out for their, meaning the children's, best interests. Ryan understands that no reader wants to see a child abused. And although she doesn't use the word abuse, this does not appear in the essay, she implies that parents who push their kids too hard to succeed, like Kiefer's mother does, is abusive. And I think this comes dangerously close to being using emotionally loaded terms in such a way as to imply that Kiefer is a bad person and a bad parent. And that is a valid criticism. Although she never says the word abuse, I think abuse is implied here. There's another kind of logical fallacy that's called the ad hominem argument. Ad hominem arguments are attacks against the person and not against the ideas that they hold. In academic conversations and writings, we do not attack the person. That's a sideshow. That's a distraction. We can attack the ideas, but attacking the person is not fair. Ryan quotes here in an interesting way, where she talks about, in this paragraph here, that Frederica and her mother filed suit because, as her mother puts it, and that's the key right there, as her mother puts it, she did not have the right body type to be accepted. As her mother puts it. Ryan could have just said Frederica and her mother filed suit because she, quote, did not have the right body type. This, I think, is kind of making a remark about her as a person, as her mother puts it, emphasizing that it's the mother who is making this argument. It's not the child who is complaining, it's the mother. It's the mother who's butting in. It's the mother who's being what they call a helicopter parent. Also, in this paragraph right here, Kiefer said she would drop her lawsuit if the school accepted her daughter. It almost sounds like it's extortion on the part of Kiefer. You just accept my daughter and I won't sue you anymore. And then she says that Ryan argues that Frederica is quite happy dancing where she is. Still, the mother gets to decide what's best for her daughter's dancing career. What doesn't come out in this is that actually Kiefer is a former dancer. The mother, Christina Kiefer, is a former dancer herself, and a fairly famous choreographer, especially on the West Coast. So who would know better about their daughter's dancing career? So I think you've got an ad hominem attack against Kiefer here, which isn't fair. Yet another logical fallacy might be faulty cause and effect. And Ryan uses cause and effect logic here to suggest that Kiefer's mother, and by extension all parents who are kind of their managers, can cause their children harm by pushing them too hard in their training. And this is especially apparent here at the very end, when she talks about the child being clearly too young to make such a decision, and that the child is the one who will pay the price, not the adult, and that the mother is causing the problem and not the ballet school. So I think that it's fair to say that perhaps Ryan is muddying the issue here. The issue is that Kiefer's daughter has not been accepted, and not that she is pushing her child to be accepted. And the issue is not the mother's decisions. It's the School of Ballet's decision. I think that's a valid criticism there, that Ryan confuses the two. Another thing to look at is whether the analogies that are in this are fair. Analogies are just a comparison, comparing one person, event, or an issue to something else to make it clearer, not misleading or confusing. In this, Ryan compares the San Francisco Ballet School's setting and admission standard to both the universities and modeling schools' setting standards. Here's where she says that UC Berkeley can reject students based on mental prowess, and a fashion modeling school can reject students based on comeliness, how pretty they are. The question is, are these analogies fair? Is Ryan comparing the ballet school to a university and the ballet school to a modeling school fair? I think the parallel between the standards used by a ballet school and those of a modeling school are pretty close. They both emphasize the candidate's appearance, among other qualities. But the admission standards of the university based on appearance? No. In principle, no, I don't think it is. That would be ridiculous. At least that's not the criteria any college admissions office would post on its own website. A critical reader, therefore, needs to object that one of Ryan's analogies is faulty. The second big question you need to answer is, to what extent does the author, do you agree with the author? To what extent do you agree with the author? Of course, as a critical reader, you have to decide whether Ryan's view that even though we might find these standards harsh, that the school has the right to set its own admission standards. It's something that you can agree or disagree about, and you need to say why in your critique. But there's a second argument, too, concerning the wisdom of subjecting the 8-year-old to this kind of rigorous professional training. And really, how practical is that to do? um, to limit the parents, like Mrs. Kiefer, from doing exactly as they please and getting help for their children. Um, and you might also look at what is kind of a hidden tension in here, that we love celebrity. We love our stars. We love our young stars. And we praise them and celebrate them. But how did they get where they got? Probably because they had parents like Mrs. Kiefer. So why do we condemn parents for pushing their children to stardom when that's what we love as a society? And you might say that this question just reflects a problem in society and not in Ryan's argument. But I think it's worth talking about here as well. So if you were to write a critique of this, the strategy might be to, in the first paragraph, you introduce the issue, give a little background, a little information. In the second paragraph, you introduce the author and the essay and summarize the author's main claims. Then in the third paragraph, you might set the context for evaluating Ryan's first claim about admission standards, and talk a little bit about discriminating and discriminatory. In the fourth paragraph, you probably want to evaluate Ryan's first claim that the ballet school has the right to set admission standards. Next, you want to talk about, you might want to summarize Ryan's second claim that parents can damage their children by pushing them too hard into professional training programs too early in age. Then you want to evaluate that second claim in a couple of paragraphs. Then you might want to evaluate the essay as a whole. Whether do you agree mostly or do you disagree mostly? And in the last paragraph, you want to conclude and either offer qualified support for the author's position, agreeing that the children caught in the star system can suffer, or there's not much we can do about the problem except watch and hope for the best. Those might be two things that you talk about in the end. So that's how you look at this. This is how you critique and maybe even write a critique of this article like this.